Japanese have memorialised the Second World War far less than the Germans have, and Tokyo is no exception. The Yokushan, a private museum near the Yasukuni Shrine, is an apologetically nationalist and revisionist rendering of the war. Japanese conquests were wars of anti-colonial liberation. The Nanjing Massacre receives no mention except the suggestion that the battle was confused. The Edo Tokyo Museum, a principal history museum, provides a far more neutral examination of the fire bombings, although there is no mention, as one would expect in Germany, of Japan's own tactical bombing campaigns against Chinese cities. And the neighbourhoods that were the centre of the destruction themselves, there is another private museum devoted to a scholarly examination of the Tokyo firebombing and a small monument in Sumida's Yokohamicho Park near the Sumida River, where so many died. As is the case in moral debates over the bombing, the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have largely dislodged Tokyo from collective memory, Japanese and non-Japanese. Only a fraction of those who have heard about the bombing of Dresden, in which 25,000 people died, know anything of Tokyo, where as many as 100,000 died.
But did the people over there ask the question, why did America bomb Japan like that? If they ask that question, they should be able to find out what they did.
No, well, they don't. They just say it's part of the war, you know. They don't take responsibility. For what happened in the war. And as he said, it's a response to anti-colonialism. It was a heroic struggle. Wow, look at this. This is Harris. The government was all too happy to forget the bombings. After the German surrender, Arthur Harris waited for his invitation to ceremonies marking Germany's surrender. None came, and on the 12th of May he wrote to Portal in protest. The next day, Churchill gave a national broadcast celebrating the victory in Europe. The Prime Minister spoke of the early days of the war, the Battle of Britain, the Blitz, the importance of Northern Ireland, the work of the Royal Navy, the Merchant Navy, the Battle of the Atlantic, the entry into the war of Russia, Japan and the United States, the liberation of France, the defeat of the V weapons campaigns, the invasion of the continent, and the post-war world. With the exception of a vague reference to bomb-shattered Berlin, the bomber offensive got not a single mention. Harris waited for some other recognition for his role in defeating Germany. It did not come. The British government excluded Bomber Command from the honours liberally handed out. It was denied a campaign medal. Clement Attlee, Churchill's successor as Prime Minister, thought little of Harris. He denied him a peerage. Harris alone, among major British war leaders, failed to secure one, and Churchill declined to intervene. Harris was given no offer of further employment, and he departed for South Africa at the end of 1945, making no effort to hide his bitterness about he and his men had been treated. Harris rushed his memoirs into print in 1947, but they did nothing to rescue his plummeting reputation. His inability to be anything but brutally honest damaged it further. He made no apologies for civilian deaths or cultural losses, claiming that bombing, in fact, only occasionally killed women and children. Defended area bombing as comparatively humane, and suggested that if he had only had more bombers, he would have single-handedly defeated the Germans. The United Kingdom's most prestigious military institute refused to review Harris's book in its Royal United Services Institution journal. Harris was finished. He spent the next 8 years in South African obscurity, running a shipping company. He returned to England in 1953, retiring on Goring-on-Thames. He spoke little, and his neighbours knew nothing of his wartime activities. To the end, he retained the support and loyalty of his men. On the German side, Speer and Goering were tried for war crimes at Nuremberg. So but Jesus, they really treated Harris badly. But he fucking asked for it. Although they didn't do anything much to stop him either. And her Churchill supported him.
Really?
Yep, Churchill supported him.
Do you think that's the reason why they didn't do anything about it? Because their biggest boss said that. Yes.
What? No, what you just said.
Why did the army didn't? You said they didn't do anything to stop him. I said probably because the biggest boss is Winston Churchill.
Well, but Churchill vacillated actually. Churchill was constantly changing his mind. And he'd say one thing one day and say another thing another day. Churchill wasn't a military strategist. He was the Prime Minister. And so the war either got a sanction or didn't, but it wasn't up to him to decide. It was up to Charles Portal, who was in charge of Air Chief of Staff. So he was in charge of the whole Air Force, the RAF. And Portal tried to get Harris to do as he was told. But Harris would say, oh yeah, okay, and then he'd just continue to do what he was already doing. Or he'd said, he told him to stop. What they gave him an out. They said to Harris, you need to focus. You need to focus your bombing. You must, and they gave him a directive. Focus your bombing on ball bearing factories, or mainly on petrol production. And then secondly, ball bearing factories. And thirdly, railway yards. And if you can't, if the weather doesn't allow you to bomb those, then you can drop your bombs on the cities. But basically we need to be fighting a strategic campaign. And so what Harris would do, he'd send small bomber. He didn't believe that was going to win the war. So he'd send small bomber forces out to bomb the ball bearing factories or bomb the bloody thing. And then as soon as the weather turned bad, he'd say, oh, it's too shitty for bombing them. We can go, and he'd send 1,000 bombers over to bomb Berlin. So he basically just went like that. And they kept telling him, they kept begging him. They knew what he was doing, and they kept begging him to stop bombing the cities and to start focusing on strategic targets. But he refused. He just continued doing what he was doing. And in the end, when they really tried to stop him, they said, you will not bomb cities, he offered his resignation. And they backed down. He said, oh no, okay, you can bomb the cities. Because he firmly believed that if he could bomb the cities to oblivion, all of the cities to oblivion, that he could win the war. And it was contrary to all the bloody, that they were getting intelligence reports from Germany. They had broken the German code, the Enigma code. They'd broken it, and they could listen in on German conversations. And the German conversations, people like Albert Speer, were saying, fuck, if they don't stop bombing our bloody, our petrochemical stations, we're fucked. We're really struggling. We can't get fighters in the air. We haven't got ball bearings to repair our engines. We haven't got the railways are so disrupted we can't transport materials from one place to another, and we haven't got enough petrol. The Battle of the Bulge was lost because the tanks had no fucking petrol. Part of the problem with the Stalingrad was lost, partly because they couldn't get resupply. They couldn't get spare parts for their tanks. It was clear as day, that they needed to keep bombing those strategic targets. And another thing they didn't do, and the Americans didn't do it, they needed follow-up bombing. They need to bomb a place at night, and then 2 or 3 days later they need to bomb it again. Because what would happen is that they'd bomb a petrochemical factory or they'd synthetic petrol factory or the synthetic rubber plant, or they'd bomb the bloody ball bearings, and everything would be in disarray, and there'd be workers rushing around trying to fix everything up. If they bombed it again, it would have been a double whammy, but they didn't. And Speer said that in his book. He said if they had bombed Schweinfurt a second time, or if they'd bombed the Myrna Dam a second time, we would have been in real trouble. But Harris refused to believe it right to the end. He never, ever, in spite of all the evidence, the Japanese were fucked up. They were really disorganized.
You can give the other book to Ross today.